was recognized in Germany. So that is an enormous step forward. And the consequence of that, or how it looks like in practice, is this case, which was decided by only very recently, in January 25. The Court of Appeal in Munich had to decide on the objections by one of the creditors against the opening in Ireland. Now, Ireland is also a member state, and therefore the court had to decide is and to which degree is the European insolvency regulation applicable in this present case. And they made it perfectly clear that it has been opened, it has been commenced in Ireland, and therefore we will recognize. The opposing party was coming with the only, or was hinting at the only exception of recognition, and that is the last loophole, so to speak, the rescue for every opposing creditor, saying that the recognition of this particular proceeding would be a violation of the German public order. And therefore, these creditors said it's a violation of public order, that certain informations were not given by the Irish court, that they based their decision of the COMI being in Ireland on wrong information, and so forth. So they heaped one argument after the other on this alleged violation of public order. And the court in Munich said, that sounds all right, and this is certainly not a violation of the German public order. If you have any problems with the commencement of the case in Ireland, please go to the Irish court and tell them. Best if you go before they have rendered the decision. Go there and bring your opposition, bring your arguments, and then wait how the judges there will decide. So this is it, and therefore automatic recognition, full stop. Point. May I then turn to the next, or do you want to say something?
Maybe just a couple notes on COMI and recognition from U.S. cases, but I think first with this case, what it reminded me of is sort of, someone trying to get 2 bites at the apple, as we would say in the United States. And, here it seemed like it's similar to where you've got one decision and you're trying to go to another to get a different decision. And so that seems to make perfect good sense to me as far as not having that second opportunity for what you lost in litigation the first time. As it relates to COMI and recognition and the analysis that courts do, at least touching on some U.S. cases, I wanted to hit on a few before we move to the next German case. But for purposes of COMI and a couple of U.S. cases I wanted to point out, one that was recently discussed by Judge Bentley that was a decision this week, and then kind of an interesting one from last year. But yeah, as we all, the basics of COMI and recognition is a foreign proceeding is filed, and then you come to the United States, file Chapter 15, ask for recognition, and as part of that analysis, the court has to, here in the U.S., has to say, well, is your center of main interest actually where you say it is? So the first Judge Bentley case from last year is a case called Sunak, which was purportedly a Hong Kong-based company that was doing business in the Cayman Islands, and they filed a Chapter 15 in the United States. No creditor or any other party opposed the COMI being what the debtor asserted, but Judge Bentley did his own analysis and did a very thorough analysis about how and why he came to the conclusion that the COMI was appropriately Hong Kong. And I think it was important because, oftentimes, or I'd say sometimes, courts, if there's no real objections, don't necessarily engage in super in-depth analysis for those types of decisions. One interesting thing out of that case is, even though Hong Kong was not necessarily where the debtor was doing a lot of business initially, what Judge Bentley found was that for the last 18 months prior to the Chapter 15 filing, Sunak's primary business activity was restructuring its debt. So the restructuring of the debt that they were doing in Hong Kong was the actual business that the court found was, made it the center of main interest, among a few other things. So fast forward to this week, and Bloomberg reported a decision by Judge Bentley in a case called Country Garden holding companies. So Country Gardens is a large real estate company out of China. They're looking to cut about $10 billion of debt. They do business and have projects all around the world: Australia, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. And fascinatingly, in this case, Judge Bentley was presented with a Chapter 15 recognition of a plan that was supposed to be based on the center of main interest being in Hong Kong, and he said, sorry, your evidence isn't good enough, even though there's no opposition. He said that Country Garden had skirted over the difficult issues and was being a little bit cute in its court papers. He noted that the company's only listed physical location in Hong Kong is a single suite, and that the CEO couldn't confirm if anyone worked there full-time. The CEO also couldn't immediately answer Judge Bentley's questions about where key executives live and work full-time, where they physically make decisions, and frequency and location of board meetings. So he said, you're going to have to come back with more evidence and see me here on December 2nd with that evidence. And the consequences of the Comey not being in Hong Kong after they'd spent a couple years in Hong Kong trying to get this plan confirmed in order then to have recognition in the U.S. could be pretty dramatic. So those are two U.S.-oriented cases.
Can I ask a question in this context? And Stephen, you probably have to help me. Wasn't it a couple of years, if not decades ago, that Bert Lifflin, the judge from the Southern District of New York, decided in the Bear Stearns case, Steve, isn't that right? That this particular company had its headquarters not in one of the Virgin Islands, one of those islands, Cayman, and nor did they have the establishment in New York, so he decided something third. He did it out of his own, so there was no one asking for it. He decided on his own.
Yes, the global forum shopping wars, I guess, continue.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, we'll now move to the third judge case.
Okay. I should, for the third case has been decided recently by the District Court in Frankfurt am Main. And it's breaking with the tradition. And I should say, or explain beforehand, that the European Insolvency Regulation is very open in recognizing. I told you that it's an automatic recognition, and the only reason for rejecting recognition would be a violation, a flagrant, manifest violation of the public order. That is a very high level. And the German autonomous cross-border insolvency law has taken over these rules pretty much one-to-one. So the German international insolvency law is very open towards recognition. We are recognizing usually whatever comes along. And now comes this decision dealing with the following case. There is construction work done in Berlin, in the center of Berlin. Those of you who are coming next year to the marathon running in Berlin, like my co-panelists here, you will run along this block, which is now under construction. It's under construction for a couple of years because the man in the background is Mr. Benko. He's an Austrian and he went recently bankrupt and had left a multi-billion debt amount. So there's a lot of discussion about it and dispute. One of the disputes is that the holding company of the entire construction is a Luxembourg company which went to London in order to go through a planned proceeding according to Chapter 26A, which is a newly introduced proceeding after the Brexit. They introduced it. And as usual, this decision, or the sanctioning order by the English court, by the English judge, was accompanied by an expert witness from Germany stating that this decision, once given the sanctioning order, will be recognized in Germany. And for some reasons which I do not understand, they had asked two professors to said, yes, it will be recognized. And that is what the usual answer is. I myself have given in at least 6 cases a similar opinion that it will be recognized. The second professor, however, he said, no, it will not be recognized. So the English judge is dealing with these opposing arguments, and he's coming to the conclusion, well, it will be recognized. And then back in Frankfurt, in Germany, one of the creditors is now suing the company for full payment. And the Frankfurt court, big surprise, saying, no, no recognition. Which is crazy from out of the world, so to speak. In a comment which is about to be published, actually it should have been published already yesterday or the day before yesterday, I'm writing, we are recognizing cases from all over the world, from the Virgin Islands, from New Zealand, from I don't know where. I don't know if we are recognizing from North Korea, I'm not entirely sure. But we are recognizing more or less everything that's coming along, but not an English plan proceeding. How stupid is this? And that's where we are. So it's gone up to the next instance, which is the Court of Appeal in Frankfurt. And I'm pretty sure that it's gone up then afterwards to the Supreme Court. May I say a few more words about the background?
Yes, I understand. It's a very interesting, interesting background that the audience would probably like to hear about.
Mr. Rochelle, he will know when I'm asking you, do you happen to know Herostratos? Probably not. This was a guy some 2,500 years ago. He wanted to become immortal by doing something extremely exceptional. So he didn't write a book, he had no talent for it, he didn't build a pyramid or anything like that. He didn't have the talent and not the money for that. And what did he? He burned the temple in Ephesus. So, and that, forgive me, don't tell this professor ever. He wanted, that is my interpretation, he wanted to do something very exceptional. And he succeeded. And here comes my prediction for the next instance. Believe it or not, he is not only a professor, he's also a part-time judge. Judge at which court? At the Court of Appeal in Frankfurt. And the case will come to his Senate. And what I understand is that he, upon the question, the surprise question, don't you see this as a reason to recuse yourself? You said, no, why? So let's see what's coming out with this. But my prediction is that the Court of Appeal will uphold this decision of non-recognition. But then, something like a week ago, 10 days ago, I spoke with the highest judge from the German Supreme Court, and he made it very clear that this is the stupidest decision which is running around. They will get it right at the end of the day. So the proceeding in the end of the day will be recognized. But this is the individual dance, so to speak. Pole dance, or however you want to call this, by this colleague of mine, who, well, is the new Herostratos. Now you learn something about antiquity.
Well, if only Las Vegas had a prop bet on whether or not the German Supreme Court would recognize or not recognize, I think we'd all be a lot richer in about 6 months. All right, so now we'll move to zooming out a little bit to the fragmentation of economies and regions in the world that you see as kind of an issue, and then we get to kind of some bigger geopolitical issues.
All right. I mean, you never can predict how the courts will decide. You know better than I do already. And therefore, the danger with this district court decision in Frankfurt is that it might be willingly or unwillingly, knowingly or unknowingly, be the expression of a tendency, of a trend, which I'm a little bit afraid of that it gains prominence. We are living in, well, to begin with myself, I grew up into a world in which I grew with the idea, with the dream of the global village, that we are coming closer together and closer together. And this dream somehow, like a bubble, imploded. And now we are approaching a period in which we have a refragmentation of the world. And I'm wondering what, in this context, and by the way, this is a question which I want to address in the book, about which I'm going to speak a little bit later. What is recognition? What is the future of recognition in a fragmentized world? That is what concerns me a little bit. Can I bring the example of Kenya? It's not an example of Kenya, but that is where I became aware of. I was teaching last year in Kenya, in Nairobi, and there I learned from the perspective of the students and the professors that the Chinese, of course, are in Kenya present, and they are financing, for instance, the highway from the airport in Nairobi down to downtown, where you have to pay. And nobody is using this highway. Same is true with the train from Nairobi down to Mombasa at the Indian Ocean. It's a purely Chinese development, functioning fantastically. Wooden chairs, by the way, and after 6 hours of traveling, I knew very well where my backbone is. So I wonder, seeing this kind of influence of the Chinese, but I don't want to blame, it's not meant to be a Chinese bashing here. Everyone who's power is exercising this power, unfortunately. So it could be replaced by anyone else. If this leads, what does this mean to a decision of a Kenya court, Nairobi court, regarding recognition of a case which deals with, let's say, a competitor of the Chinese railway company? I don't know. That is a question which concerns me a little bit, because, once again, the danger of the Frankfurt decision is that for whichever reasons, it remains as it is, and nobody is opposing that. Which I do not believe, to be sure, but we never can tell. So what in this context means recognition? That is my concern.
So zooming out then a little bit more before we get to talk about the book, you know, we're looking at a different geopolitical environment economically. I mean, obviously talking about debt, both Admiral Inman talked about, you know, concerns about U.S. debt, and you talked yesterday about debt being used as a, you know, as a weapon. So now looking at where we're at in 2025, what kind of views do you see now? Really big picture, and then we'll, you know, get into the book that you and Professor Westbrook are working on.
Okay. He meant it seriously that I'm the one who is talking on this panel. It's unfortunate. Too bad that Jay is not here. The debt. I mean, there is one subject about which I've written a couple of articles, and I'm pretty sure you here in the United States, you know it all. It's running under the headline, Weaponization of Financial Instruments. And that is where I primarily deal with the long-term strategies, with the CDSs and so forth. But there is, of course, also I've written once an article about a treaty that was before 2022, a treaty between Russia and Ukraine. My prediction then was that this treaty alone would have been a wonderful weapon in the hands of Russia against Ukraine. For some reasons, they didn't pull this trigger. So that is something extremely dangerous. I repeat what I said yesterday. I'm asking for pardon for those who have been there yesterday. Your second president, John Adams, he is allegedly has mentioned once that there are two ways of subduing a foreign country, either by military force or by debts. So debts are dangerous. And we are in a very economized world, and economists tend to tell us that debts are fine. They're even telling that the huge amount of debts that you have nowadays, that the French have nowadays, by the way, they are very much endangered with their 120+% of debt towards GDP. Italy with 150 and so on. So there is much shaky ground around. That this is something which needs, or which concerns me. It concerns me particularly in the context of another field of interest in which I'm working, that is sovereign restructuring, sovereign debt restructuring. I'm an advocate of the original idea of the IMF, of an orderly procedure. They called it SDRM. You might remember this acronym, Sovereign Debt Restructuring Mechanism. Because this is something what we insolvency lawyers are used to, that we have a structure. As I mentioned yesterday in my lecture, I said that to have a procedure in a chaotic situation is extremely helpful. You don't have right now, in the case of a sovereign default, you don't have a structure. The structure is built by the creditors, and that is what concerns me enormously. The SDRM of the IMF failed because the objection from, I now use a short term, used by the Wall Street to eliminate, and now we have contractual clauses, the collective action clauses. And this is far too one-sided. I wish your brother would be here, because then I would tell that it's necessary to have someone who's controlling the creditors. The creditors tend to follow their own interests, and that is where I see a huge danger. But I've seen the green card.
Yes.
Is it okay if I...
Oh, certainly. If I may make a quick overview on, before Professor Pauls talks about his book. So Professor Pauls got to know Professor Westbrook back in 1997. And Professor Westbrook reviewed, I believe, a paper that you had written, and then brought Professor Pauls over to the university for a major conference with leading academics from around the world and other practitioners. And as many of us here know, but hopefully the younger folks who are here, Professor Westbrook is a major force in the international insolvency community, responsible for a significant amount of progress that's been made in both the adoption of Chapter 15 and the work at Intl. And so I thought I'd first ask you to maybe give the audience a little bit of a background on how you and Professor Westbrook have more recently been connecting on those weekly, bi-weekly Zoom calls for the last several years that then has led to this book project.
Thank you, Roman. Little correction to what you said to the younger people here in this room. Jay is not a major figure, he is the big figure. I can tell you that his fame, apologies for the two professors here in front of me, but he really is. Just to give you an impression, and that was kind of ultimate proof for me, I was teaching a couple of times in Moscow at the Lomonosov University, at the time when it was still doable. And it was a fantastic experience. And when these kids were wonderful, when they found out that I had previously published something together with Jay Westbrook and that we are friends, my reputation among the Russian students increased dramatically, because everyone knew, of course, Jay Westbrook. So this is a little correction. Now, the funny thing is that I think it was 2020, he wrote to me, or we had a phone call, probably he wrote to me, saying that one of his colleagues left the UT and he has nobody left with whom he can discuss the issues of cross-border insolvency law. If I would be willing to have occasional, and he in brackets added, bi-weekly phone calls or Zoom calls that we just discuss on this and that. Of course, I was more than happy to have this, and we started to talk about everything, by the way, including soccer. Soccer is, he's a big fan of soccer, and I'm also an extremely big fan of soccer, and therefore many of our talks were also about soccer, but primarily about cross-border insolvency. At some point, we created the idea that, I mean, he is someone who for something like 40 years, someone like 40 years, are working in this field. We had a certain influence on the developments of this field. He enormously, much more than I do, with the ancestral model. I with my contributions through the IMF and the World Bank. That we should step back a little bit from the everyday issues of how correlates Section 328 with the decision of that court and another statute with this section on the one side. If we shouldn't, that was the question, should we write something about the fundamentals of insolvency law? And that is what we are working on for now, something like 3 years. And that's actually the reason why I came here. We wanted to sit tomorrow and the day after tomorrow together and continue our work on that. Fundamentals of insolvency law is, as I said, stepping back a little bit and to see from a broader perspective, from a bird eyes perspective, the insolvency law. And that creates enormously interesting insights. I mentioned in my presentation yesterday in the lecture already a few of those things. To see the historical development is one thing. To see, for instance, the impact that anthropology has in this context. I mentioned this also yesterday in my talk. But also morals, what morals play in this context. What the social impact, that is something which is very dear to him and to me as well. To see, to take off a little bit the modern perspective of the law and economics development, to see everything under the perspective of efficiency. Insolvency law is, in our mind, not so much about efficiency, because efficiency is a word which gets easily a one-direction dimension. So efficient for whom? For the creditor, for the debtor, or for whomsoever. We want to replace it more with a broader concept, and the best word I can find in this context, maybe Jay comes with a still better one, is fairness. Fairness is a much broader concept because it takes into account the social implications. And as I said, an insolvency proceeding is dealing with the situation with catastrophic social implications, at least in many cases. I mean, to give you just one example, and you are here in the United States as heard of this phenomenon as we are in Europe. More and more hospitals are taken over by money-seeking private equity firms. They try to pull out as much money as possible from this hospital, therefore engaging primarily into cost-intensive surgery, and that is beautification of I don't know what, but thereby neglecting the medical care for the entire population. And what I only recently read is that California is about to enact a law forbidding the involvement of private equity in hospitals. And we have something similar in Europe, as the same tendency. So this is, in our understanding, kind of background. that we want to push further in the foreground, to make it revisible, to make the general public aware of that insolvency law is not an instrument in the hands of one party, of one side, but is something which is caring for the social peace in the end of the day. So we are also dealing in this context with cross-border, of course. I mean, that is what brings us primarily together. The cross-border insolvencies, so we are writing also about the fundamentals of cross-border insolvency law, and here we are with the question, which I found out as a consequence of my most recent visit to Kenya, that how does recognition look like in a world of fragmentation? Because in the end of the day, and most of you will know, recognition is trust. Trust, you recognize the proceeding because you are trusting that the foreign proceeding is doing okay, according to the standards you have, or you take as given. So it's the trust into the system, into the other system. The most extreme case in which this trust is completely broken is by Putin. Putin saying that all countries who are not following his policy are enemy countries. You can be sure that the Russian court will never recognize a German or a US proceeding because we are enemy countries. I think we are done.
Well, certainly looking forward to the book. I mean, bankruptcy is, I've learned and lived through it, and looking at it from the United States, it's truly the cornerstone of our capitalistic economy. It's, you know, a place for refuge for honest but unfortunate debtors is the phrase we hear. Prudent risk-taking. What does that mean? Risk-taking by whom, and what risks are you considering? Is it just those of the investors? Is it in different types of industries, those affecting society? And it sounds like some very big questions and discussions that will be in the book. And so with that, I think we might have 30 seconds or a minute for questions for Professor Paulus, not for me. All right. Well, thank you all very much.